In the dark shadows and in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast, we are the brave and bold. And Abram said unto himself, surely these are not gods that made the earth and all mankind, but these are the servants of gods. And Abram remained in the house of Noah, and there knew the Lord and his ways, and he served the Lord all his days of his life. And all that generation forgot the Lord, and served other gods of wood and stone, and rebelled all their days. And King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control, and all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, Phut, Mitzrayim, Cush, and Canaan with their families, and they said to each other, come and let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching the heaven. And we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, and that we may reign mightily over them, that they may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And they all went before the king and told the king these words, and the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled consisted of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth and found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar. About 2 days' walk, and they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin, and they began to build it. And whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And all these people, all these families divided themselves into three parts. The first said, we will ascend into heaven and fight against him. And the second said, we will ascend into heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, we will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And God knew all their works and all their evil thoughts. And he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower. And on account of its height, the mortar and bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it until those who went up had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and the bricks, and thus it was done daily. And behold, these ascended and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. But if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And the Lord knew their thoughts, and it came to pass, when they were building, they cast arrows towards the heaven, and the arrows fell upon them filled with blood. When they saw them, they said to each other, surely we have slain all those that are in heaven. For this was from the Lord, in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And God said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, Come and let us descend and confuse their tongues, that one man shall not understand the language of his neighbors. And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man's neighbor's tongues, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hands of his neighbor the lime and the stone, which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, and he would die. And they did so for many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And the Lord smote the 3 divisions that were there, and he punished them accordingly to their works and designs. Those who said, We will ascend to heaven and serve our gods, became like apes and elephants. And those who said, We will smite the heaven with arrows, the Lord killed them. One man through the hand of his neighbor, in the 3rd division of those who said, We will ascend to heaven and fight against them. The Lord scattered them throughout the earth. Makes a little more sense. And those who were left amongst them they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, and they forsook the building. And they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called the place Babel. For there the Lord confounded the language in the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And as to the tower which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up a 3rd part of it. And a fire also descended from heaven and burned another 3rd, and the other 3rd is left to this day. And it is of that part which was aloft in the circumference of a 3 days' walk. Many of the sons of men died in the tower, a people without number. This was the book of Jasher, chapter 9.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Okay, everybody, welcome and greetings and welcome of the American Sermon. My name is John Towers. I will be your, old world order king for the evening. The American Sermon is a limited series in which we are digging into the occult founding of the United States. This is sort of a spin-off from my ongoing podcast called The Abracast, where every week we talk about the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence. You can find the Abracast anywhere good podcasts can be found. I would like to mention before we get started that some of the things we're going to talk about here tonight might cause a knee-jerk reaction or might trigger you depending on your relationship with Freemasonry or your views on religion or your belief in the Bible, or if you're looking for someone to ramble on about secret codes on your fucking dollar bills or secret societies that are running the world from, shadow governments, or speculate about the true meaning of the Eye of Providence, this podcast might not be what you're looking for. Also, I'm wading into these myths, not tethered to the common way, the common wisdom about these stories. and the myth, the myths, like God is good, Satan is bad. I am checking all that stuff at the door. We're leaving the ethics and the morality out of these stories. So I'm not going to be talking about the people who revere or worship Cain, Satan, or Nimrod as evil, or that Jehovah and the people who worship it are good. The stories will put themselves in context. With that being said, I do hope you stick around. This is going to be a pretty good show, I think. It's a follow-up to it's a follow-up to part 1, and part 3 we're shifting gears. So this is the last of the Mason stuff for a while. The featured books that we're reading tonight are The History of Freemasonry, Albert Mackey, 1905. We're doing some reading from the Bible, and we're going to finish up with an essay from this guy named David S. Farkas. He's a rabbi, and he wrote an essay called In Search of the Biblical Hammurabi. So we did at the beginning of part 1, we kind of talked at the beginning a little bit about the origin of Freemasonry before we start getting into this Masonic legend that we spent an awful lot of time talking about. So I'm just going to return to the International Encyclopedia of Secret Societies and Fraternal Orders by David Axelrod, and I'm going to read this section about the secrets of Freemasonry. So the legend of the temple, or the legend, these Freemasonic legends, the legend of the temple has all to do with Solomon's temple. However, there is a deeper, I guess on the timeline, it's a newer, in the narrative story, but there is an alternate sort of legend that is mentioned here in the Secret of Freemasonry entry. So we're just gonna bust through this here. The secrets. Oh, hold on. I gotta get myself right now. The original secrets of the Freemasons were almost certainly trade secrets, probably combined with mutual assistance in the form of names and contacts and so forth. Though a panoply of ritual and ornament had grown as early as the 14th century, it was consolidated in the 15th. A text from 1425 that names Euclid as the founder of Masonry and traces the craft back to the Tower of Babel and the Temple of Solomon. When I said this Tower of Babel business was newer, the only reason I said that is because we started the story in the antediluvian era. So it started with Cain and Abel, right? So, just so I'm not, just a way to explain myself. Must owe at least a part of its content to wishful thinking. The text is part of this old charges, a collection of over 100 documents that are regarded by modern Masons as the main guide to the precepts of Masonry. The history of the old charges is by no means clear, and there is not even any firm agreement on how many there are, but a popular figure is about 115. The modern secrets are either very secret indeed or substantially non-existent. According to Masonic pietists, the innermost secrets were conveyed to Adam by God. They were concealed and preserved during the flood in a cave dug by Enoch, not to be confused with the city of Enoch, and not to be confused with Cain's son Enoch. This is the Enoch that was eventually translated into heaven and given a sweet-ass divine power armor of an angel, and were codified in the Temple of Solomon. The tradition of the transmission of these secrets, of course, Masonic there seems to be non-Masonic collaborations of their nature of existence. Okay, so I read all of that just so I could qualify all this Tower of Babel stuff. So a text from 1425 names Euclid as the founder of Masonry and traces the craft back to the Tower of Babel and the Temple of Solomon. Well, we covered the Solomon business in part 1. So now let's get into this Tower of Babel business. Okay, to set the stage for tonight's story, God's watery holocaust, the deluge is over, and Noah and his family, they receive 2 commandments, basically. They were like, well, they received a lot more commandments. So Adam, there was a covenant with Adam and Eve, and I don't know. And then when they got kicked out of the garden, the covenant changed. And then that covenant stuck around for a little bit. And then after the flood, God did this new covenant with Noah. This is what the rainbow, basically the rainbow was all about, this new covenant with Noah. So they get this new covenant, and then I don't know if it's part of the new covenant or if it's kind of a separate aside. It's a sidebar. We'll table it. We'll table the new covenant. It's probably like a sidebar where he goes, look, you're allowed to eat meat now, which is ridiculous because you only have 2 of every fucking kind of thing. It's going to be generations before they can eat meat. I don't know. Anyhow, part of this thing, or aside from it, like God says, okay, what you need to do is you need to start fucking, you need to repopulate this whole world, and then you need to scatter. You can't hang out with each other all the fucking time. So they start repopulating the earth as they were commanded, but they did not scatter across the land as they were commanded. It seems, to add to the problem, it seems that God ignores humans, maybe even the whole earth, for a long time. Like a long time. The descendants of Noah, they're out from the ranks of the descendants of Noah. I believe it's a maybe great-grandson. I think it's the great-grandson of Cush. So it would be a great-great-grandson of Noah, I believe. That's not on my note. I did that in my brain. This guy named Nimrod, he becomes the king of all the people. All of the people. He was like, the New World Order? He's like the Old World Order. He was in charge of every motherfucker. Subsequently, Nimrod had a wife named Seriamis, and they would eventually have a son named Tammuz, which is going to come into all this quite later. Imagine what life was like for these new people. Imagine the devastated environment they were raised in for years and generations after this genocidal flood. These people probably lived starving, eating like grass and bugs and shit in the mud for whole generations. Like it's easy to think why they would want to build a tower and fucking shoot arrows into heaven. Like after looking at the devastation that God did to the planet. Anyhow, we're going to get the story right from the horse's mouth, right? This is Genesis 11, 1 through 9, the story of the Tower of Babel. This is the one right from the Bible, the Bible. This is, we did Jasher, which is apocryphal at the beginning, which is kind of like a more fleshed out kind of thing. We did that one, by the way. I didn't mention it. That first paragraph pretty much sums up the whole point of my talk tonight. He says, this is Jasher. He says, where's a good place to pick up so I don't have to read the whole thing? I'll just do. And Abram said unto himself, surely these are not the gods that made the earth and all mankind, but these are the servants of God. And Abram remained in the house of Noah, and there knew the Lord in his ways, and he served the Lord in all the days of his life, and all the generations forgot the Lord. and served other gods of wood and stone and rebelled all their days. I believe that gods of wood and stone and rebelled all their days pretty much sums up in a way these founding Masons. You know, they were fucking rebels, and they're obsessed with wood and stone and building stuff. All right, so I had a misfire. Back to the Bible, the Tower of Babel. And now the whole world had one language and one common speech. As people moved eastward, they found the plain of Shinar. They settled there. And they said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly," as they used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come and let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches unto the heavens, so that we can make a name for ourselves, and otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city. See, this is what I said. Like, he was ignoring everybody after the flood. So think about how when we get into what he qualifies, like, he starts Jehovah, God, whatever, it starts saying some crazy stuff about the accomplishment that these people did. So when we get to that part, just think about how long it must have took them to get to the part where he's like, "Oh, what is that? What's that shit down there?" Like, you could see a couple things from space. At this point, you could see, like, the Earth from space, but he's like, what is that? Is that a fucking tower? Hold on, I need to go down there and see what these motherfuckers are doing. So the Lord came down to see the tower, or to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, quote, "If as one people speaking the same language they could have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come and let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So I said at the beginning that all these stories will put themselves in context, but I feel like I need to stress this. Like, these people grew up in a soggy, muddy hell because of this deluge. And then God turns a blind eye to the earth, apparently, for however long it takes to make, 600,000 men? That seems to be a long time. And then all of a sudden God's like, "Hey, they're building a tower. I should go fucking check that shit out." And then when he gets down there, he was so impressed, it seems like, that he was like, I try to keep it straight. So it looks the tower, and it was like, if they can do this, if they could do this together, nothing that they want to do is going to be impossible. I think that statement is, I think it's telling, but it's shocking. It's shocking. God said, "These people are working so well together that I have got to fucking stop them." So the Lord scattered them from over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. And that is why it's called Babel, is because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole of the earth. So I wrote a book about this. Folks that liked the last episode too, there's a lot of the story points from Cain and Abel and from the Tower of Babel that is in my graphic novel, The Ages. So I feel like I've been dealing with this stuff now for a few years at least. But like, it's just chilling and it's shocking. And one of my ideas that I had in the book was that God, he couldn't wipe out the corruption because he's God. He never gets anything right. And I imagine that's probably going to turn a lot of people off, but it's my point of view. Like, he fucks everything up. It fucks everything up. So the idea in the Tower of Babel story is the reason he divides men is so divided they will war against each other. And in the scriptures, this is actually what happens after Babel. After their tongues get confused, they kind of spread out a little bit, build their own little cities, and then start fucking fighting each other, which is a whole other fascinating story, but it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about tonight. So I'm just going to move on. I feel like I'm getting bogged down in tertiary bullshit. Anyhow, I call it World War Zero. It's out there. That's what I call the war. So we can dive as deep as you want into all this. Eventually, in some of the stories, Nimrod dies. And Semiramis has a kid named Tammuz, who was a widow's son. He was a widow's son. A widow's son. There's these widow's sons just piling up everywhere around us. And Semiramis declares that Nimrod became the son after he died. So hold that thought. We know that there are these Freemasons, the way they circumambulate, they call it, through their lodges. They follow the path of the sun. It's all based on the sun. And I'm going to jump over real quick to Tom. I wasn't going to talk about Thomas Paine until the later parts, but we're going to jump over to Thomas Paine's Origin of Freemasonry very quickly, which it was published after he died, and many people believe it was the missing chapter of the Age of Reason. By the way, if you're a college student and you use and you cry for safe spaces, I want you to put everything you're doing down right now and go read the Introduction to the Age of Reason. You're welcome. Anyhow, Paine says this about the secrets of Freemasonry. You know, this was said at the time of the founding. So these are the Masons that we're investigating. These are the Masons that we're looking at. So this is the secret they were keeping. I should mention that I can't find any proof that Thomas Paine was a Mason, but he seems to know an awful lot about it. He travels in these... He was British born. Well, all the founding fathers were British born, actually. They didn't become Americans until later, but he was a Brit. He was an Englishman. And Ben Franklin actually convinced him to come over to the States. And then Ben Franklin also actually pushed him to publish. And Ben Franklin was a huge, gigantic Freemason. And Paine's work, his pamphleteering, was like the propaganda of the revolution. We're going to get into all this stuff when it's pertinent. But this is what Paine says about the secret that the founding Freemasons were keeping. Quote, "To come then at once to the point, Masonry is derived and is the remains of the religion of the ancient Druids, who, like the Magi of Persia and the priests of Heliopolis in Egypt, were priests of the sun. They paid worship to this great luminary as the great visible agent of the great invisible cause, whom they styled time without limits," unquote. The Christian... this is still Paine. The Christian, for some reason, I fucked my quote system up here. The Christian religion and Masonry have one and the same common origin. Both are derived from the worship of the sun. The difference between the origin is that Christian religion is a parody on the worship of the sun, which they put a man whom they call Jesus Christ in the place of the sun and pay him the same adoration which was originally paid to the sun. As I have shown in the chapter of the origin, blah, blah, blah. Skip through all this editor nonsense. Okay, so they're talking about sun worship. In Masonry, many of the ceremonies of the Druids are preserved in their original states, at least without any parody. With them, the sun is still the sun, and his image in the form of the sun is the great emblematic ornament of the Masonic lodges and Masonic dresses. It is the central figure of their apron, and they wear it also pendant upon their breasts in their lodge and in their procession. It has a figure of a man as the head of a sun, as Christ is always represented. Hey guys, John here. We are launching our first contest. It's called the Vessel of the Art giveaway, and we're giving away a fine glass mason jar with the Abercast logo on it. I'm pretty excited about this. Will be some other swag for sure. Next time you apply the formula and you mix up your weapon of mass distraction to watch with the show, you could whip it up into this fucking bad boy right here. Right now, all you have to do is sign in to like the Abercast Facebook page and submit your email. You go to abercast.com, submit to the emailing list. Or the mailing list right there. And once you have those two things, you are entered. We're gonna start doing go live videos on the Abercast page. We've done a couple trial runs so far. We're gonna start doing more of them, and that's where we'll announce the winners. March 20th and April 17th so far. It'll be on there, but these go lives are going on quite often. Don't forget to sign into the mailing list. When you sign in the mailing list, you get access to bonus material. It's usually graphic components of the podcast. And like I said, when you like the Abercast Facebook page, you get access to these go lives and all that stuff that we're rolling out over there. Also, a notification that we have shut down our Patreon in the interest of fighting techno censorship across the galaxy. So, thanks for hanging in there. Back to Nimrod and Semiramis and Tammuz. Once Tammuz was born, Semiramis decreed that Tammuz was Nimrod reborn. So we can sort of see what Payne was talking about there, this bit about Christianity being a parody of this old-timey sun worship. Yes, okay, baby, I see you. I got cats everywhere. I've been actually thinking about this for a while, since I did all those Nimrod, Tammuz, Babylon episodes of the Abercast, and I'm pretty sure I have like a mid to high 90 degree percentile that all of Christianity are actually worshiping Nimrod or Tammuz, and all these Catholics throw in a little bit of Semiramis / Mary business for good measure. But perhaps that is a topic for another time. And we're probably going to wind up talking about Semiramis again when we get talking about the American goddess Columbia. I think we're gonna wind up revisiting Semiramis a little bit in that episode. Like all of these old stories go, there are different versions and spin-offs and continuations where we're going to the end, this part of our story, just by saying that once God caused the confusion of tongues, each new language group kind of scattered and took the story or their version of this Holy Trinity with them. Kind of as a way to start or perpetuate this, the this dying and rising god myth that we see everywhere, even the fucking Zeitgeist movie and all this stuff. We've done a couple episodes about that too. But this is where, Balder the Brave and, how many ever of them fucking come from, originally from this Tower of Babel story. And, as a possibility. I'm not saying that I believe that there was actually a Nimrod guy and a Tammuz guy and a gigantic tower guy. I'm talking about the cultural implications of the story, right? In other stories, he's known by the name Amraphel, who is one of the 9 kings in the War of the 9 Kings, or the War of Shinar, or the Siddim. This is the war after the Tower of Babel incident in Genesis. Again, the Ages graphic novel addresses this war briefly. There's been podcasts about it, podcast episodes about it as well. So, John, what in the world does this fucking have to do with Freemasonry? Because it seems like we would never get here, right? So we're going to go to the Mackey book right now, The History of Freemasonry. The universal sentiment of Masons of the present day is to confer upon Solomon, the king of Israel, the honor of being the first Grand Master. But the legend of the craft has long before thought that there was a tradition of the temple extant, bestowed at least by implication, that title upon Nimrod, the king of Babylonia of Assyria. It had tributes at the first organizations of a fraternity of craftsmen to him, saying that he gave a charge to the workmen whom he sent to assist the king of Nivea building castles and cities. That is to say, he framed for them a constitution in the words of the legend. Quote, "This was the first time that ever Masons had any charge of his science," unquote. It was the first time the craft were organized into a fraternity working under a constitution or body of laws. And as Nimrod was the autocratic maker of these laws, its result as a necessary consequence that their first legislator, legislating with the dictatorial and unrestricted sovereign power, was also their first Grand Master. The view of early history of Masonry presented to us by the legend of the craft, which differs so much from the modern opinion. So this was written, when? I forgot. Hold on. This was written in 1905. And he's already talking about stuff lost to modern Masonry of the time. Although it has almost become obsolete, is worthy of at least a passing consideration. That sounds interesting. Who was this Nimrod? And who held so exalted a position in the eyes of the old legendists? And why had they assigned him the rank and power which modern craftsmen have thought to belong to justly the king of Israel? Or I would add Hiram Habif. The answers of these questions will be an appropriate commentary for the part of the legend of the craft, which contains the story of this old Assyrian monarch. The estimation of the character of Nimrod has been almost universally entertained by the ancients as well as the modern, obtained no support with the brief account of him contained in the book of Genesis. Josephus portrays him as a tyrant in his government of his people, vainglorious of his great power, a despiser and hater of God. Well, we've kind of seen this in the legend of the temple that we talked about, despiser and hater of God. At least someone from a different, race with a different set of powers. And instigated by this feeling, the building of a tower through which he could avenge himself of God for having destroyed the world. For this view of his character, Nimrod, Josephus was, in all probability, indebted to the legend of the Orientalists. So when you're looking this far back into history, whenever you see the word Orientalist or Oriental region, or what they're talking about is the Middle East. To modern ears, Orientalist means the Far East, China and Japan and all this business. But, the turn of the last century, we're talking about Orientalists is, the Arabian Nights and that kind of stuff, which had clustered around the name of Nimrod. Just as in ancient times, legends always did cluster around great and mighty men. Thus, in the ancient chronicles, he was represented as of gigantic stature, 10 or 12 cubits of height. So there's actually a ton of research out there. And I hate to keep referring back to the Abercast podcast, but or my book. Like, this isn't a big commercial for any of this stuff, but there is a lot of speculation regarding the experiments or whatever. Nimrod was clearly doing rituals to make himself into a Nephilim. And I get into it a lot in one of the other podcasts. Well, not a lot. I get into it a little bit. But we do get into in the graphic novel too. So this thing about him being of a gigantic stature, there is stuff about it written. Also, the other thing that we hardly even mention here in this reading, I think, is that he had through his great grandfather or his great grandfather, he had come into possession of these set of skins that God, Jehovah, made for Adam. So it's these skins that gave him superpowers. The skins gave him control over animals. And Nimrod, somehow got it through this lineage. Remember in the first part where I said that there's this weird thing about sons in the wrong order receiving blessings from their father or from God, in the case of Cain and Abel. He winds up with these magic underpants of Adam's. So this also gave him superpowers. So not only was he doing weird, probably sex rituals, as he had this pair of magic underpants. To him I'm sorry, I'm off on a tangent again. To him was attributed the inventions of idolatry, and he is said to have returned to Chaldea after the destruction of the Tower of Babel, and to have persuaded the inhabitants to become fire worshippers. So, fire worshippers, think about the spirits of fire and the sons of fire from part 1. He built a large furnace and commanded to all who refused the idolatrous worship should be cast into it. He actually threw Abram into one of these fiery furnaces. The scriptural account of Nimrod is very brief and unsatisfactory one. It is merely that Cush began Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty, this whole thing, he began to be a mighty one on the earth. And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and had at the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. The craft have in both forms of the legend recognized Nimrod as a great mason, nor have the criticisms of Josephus and the scandalous legends of the Orientalists had the slightest effect on their apparent estimation. the mighty monarch, the founder of nations, and the builder of cities. If we now refer to the legend of the craft, we shall find the old Masonic legendist, although, of course, he had never seen nor heard the discoveries contained in the cuneiform inscriptions, had rejected the traditional estimate of Nimrod's character, as well as the supposed result of the destruction of the Tower of Babel. We had wisely selected Babylon as the first seat, and Nimrod, who may have never even went by that name. We're going to talk about the many names in Nimrod later, and is the founder of the sciences and especially of architecture. He's out there fucking building temples, bro. Towers and cities. As Cain did before him. Remember, Cain built Enoch. This is in this, there is conformity to the legendary account with the facts of history, not usually with legendists. So, now you're like, John, what in the world does this have to do with founding of the United States? And it seemed like we would never get here. So there's an essay from this there's an essay called "The Search for the Biblical Hammurabi" by this dude who's a rabbi, David S. Farkas. Hammurabi is this historical king of ancient Babylon. He reigned from 1792 BC to 1750 BC. And is known for a few things. He's known for his military conquests, and he's known for his code of laws that he came up with. And historically speaking, this is the code that God, Jehovah, copied off of on Mount Sinai when he made those tablets for Moses. So here we go. We're going to get into this essay. Again, it's called "In Search of the Biblical Hammurabi." The relationship between the code of Hammurabi and some portions of the Bible is taken for granted by scholars today. This thing was written in 2005, I believe. And much has been written about the striking similarities. Skipping ahead. For beyond confronting the questions posed by the similarities between the Bible and the code, one must grapple with the more fundamental problem. Why isn't Hammurabi himself mentioned in the Bible? To be sure, it is certainly true that not all contemporary figures are mentioned in the Bible. Still, Hammurabi is widely recognized to have been the dominant political power in his area. Its period coincides roughly with the lifespan of Abraham, who, according to biblical Jewish chronology, lived 1812 BCE until 1637 BCE. The Bible describes numerous diplomatic activities between Abraham and the political leaders of the day, so there is at least a reason to believe that a powerful ruler such as Hammurabi would have been made an appearance on the biblical stage. In Genesis, we learn of a major battle that took place near the Dead Sea. This is the Battle of the Nine Kings that I was talking about. The first of the kings mentioned is Amraphel, the king of Shinar, which is where the Tower of Babel was built. Babylon. Hollywood, Babylon. Who exactly was this king ever since the days of the famed Assyriologist Eberhard Schrader, 1836 to 1908 A.D.? Scholars have identified this king with none other than Hammurabi. Oh. Skipping ahead. This alone, then, might appear to have resolved our question. Hammurabi is mentioned in the Bible. He is only mentioned by the name Amraphel. Yet this answer by itself is unsatisfying, for we know that Hammurabi to have been a famous potentate. One of the first great rulers of recorded civilization, Amraphel, by contrast, is barely known today outside of the Babel, if at all. It seems very unusual that the great and mighty Hammurabi should be identified with so anonymous a figure as Amraphel. Here is where the rabbinic sages enter the picture. According to our sages, Amraphel is none other than the famous Nimrod. Nimrod, of course, is hardly a run-of-the-mill ruler. Genesis describes him as the first man to amass power. There are many extant rabbinical legends and traditions concerning Nimrod. Perhaps the most famous speaks of him having thrown Abraham into a fiery furnace in Ur-Kasdim. You can find this, if you're following along at home, in Legend of the Jews by Ginsberg. I didn't mention it during the episode because for some reason the tower is missing, I believe, from the Legends of the Jews, which is interesting in and of itself, I suppose. Oh, here we go. Another legend holds that Nimrod came into possession of Adam's hunting garments, which gave him control over the wild beasts. I had a garment like that when I was in art school. Baby, you know what I'm saying. Until it was forcefully wrested away from him by Esau. The description of him as a powerful ruler and the legends that sprang up around him show that he was seen already in ancient times as an important figure. Skipping ahead a little bit. Thus, the scholars identified Hammurabi with Amraphel, and the sages identify Amraphel with Nimrod. This leads us to the conclusion that based on Midrashic tradition, Amraphel, Nimrod, and Hammurabi are all the same person. Indeed, the name Hammurabi might actually mean Ham the Great, for Nimrod was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah. Thus, Hammurabi is indeed mentioned in the Torah. That's like a rap lyric. The same man portrayed in the Bible as the mighty King Nimrod is known today to the world at large as the mighty King Hammurabi. Why would Hammurabi, if our hypothesis is correct, be described in Genesis 10:9 as a mighty hunter before the Lord? It seems like a strange description for a king. Moreover, Nimrod was depicted by the sages as someone who caused the world to rebel against God. Nimrod brought darkness to the world. I disagree with this. I've been trying to hold my tongue, but I disagree with this. God brought this darkness. Nimrod's trying to deal with it, eating grass and mud. Fucking like pigs in the mud in the world. Hammurabi, on the other hand, is known to the world as a great king, as one who introduced the rule of law into an uncivilized society, though through a civil code. So who was he? A despotic tyrant or a wise leader devoted to the rule of law? Can these two be diametrically opposed viewpoints to be reconciled? Well, to me, this question seems to perfectly encapsulate some of the larger questions about this episode and the last episode that we've been talking about, the morality of these mythoses and the point of view in which we're consuming them, we're experiencing them. You know, this reminds me of the very beginning part of this episode where I was like, God good, everything else bad, you know. These stories are interesting when you flip the perspective, which, again, is also probably pretty much the whole point of my graphic novel, The Ages. I have in my notes the extra Jehovial Sons of Fire stuff. So with the emergence of Hammurabi, Nimrod, Though, can we imagine that men began to look at things differently? No longer was God the final arbiter. This is back to the essay, by the way. This is not me editorializing. Or what was right and wrong. Instead, man was. The Torah had yet been given in Nimrod's time, but according to the rabbinic tradition, the Noahide laws were already known with the enactment and acceptance of Hammurabi's code. This is interesting altogether. Man began to emerge from his complete dependence on God as the source of all law. Hammurabi's code gave mankind the gift of self-government. I think that we're going to have to do a civics episode in here somewhere where this is going to become this one sentence is going to become very important. The complete dependence on God as it began to emerge from his complete dependence on God as the source of all law. Full stop. This is the important part. Hammurabi's code gave mankind the gift of self-government. All right. What do you guys think of all this? To me, I think it's crystal clear that the Masons, or at least these old-timey Masons, like around the time of the founding, revere and hold up this King Nimrod as the first great Mason, as like the founding father of Freemasonry. Despite him being a villain in the Bible. Well, villain is a small word. He's like an antichrist, right? Well, he's actually not even an antichrist. The dude was like an anti-god. He was building a tower to shoot arrows into heaven. Like, anyways, if you travel to Washington, D.C. today, keep your eyes peeled because Hammurabi or Nimrod appears in a marble bas relief as one of the 23 lawgivers forever enshrined in the House of Representatives in the state capitol. He is also on the south wall of the U.S. Supreme Court building. I think that's important. You could just Google search Hammurabi in Washington, D.C. and see this awesome bas relief of him. It's great. So if you're looking to unpack some of this stuff, you could visit the abercast.com. You can go to abercast.com and visit the featured topic link. Head to the Tammuz/Babylon section. You're going to find a bunch of episodes to dig into. Nimrod the Hunter and the Tower of Babel, World War Z, and Adam's Magic Wonder Pants. Those are two great episodes, by the way. Tammuz, the Dying and Rising God, which was a listener favorite for a long time. And then the two Babylons, part 1, the death of Tammuz, and part 2, the deification of Tammuz, which are both great. And they kind of answer the zeitgeist, the accusation leveled against Tammuz by the Zeitgeist movie. And if you like this topic, you might also want to swing through the Genesis section of the feature topic link as well. There will be stuff that you like there for sure. And please check out abercast.com. Check out my books, especially my latest graphic novel, which I was talking about a little bit in this episode, called The Ages. So basically it's once Cain gets cursed to walk the earth, he's cursed to walk the earth. And it's charting Cain's travels through the ages. But you can also pick up a t-shirt there. There are social media links at the bottom of the pages. Hit me up. Let me know what you think about all this stuff. And thank you guys for the support and listening to the episode. I appreciate it. I'd also appreciate a 5-star review. Or 5-star rate and a good review. I'd appreciate any of those things. And I'm out of here. Thank you guys. Everybody, don't forget about the American Sermon. You find it a lot of good places, a lot of good pod places. If you're whatever podcast podcatcher you pay attention to, whether it be like iHeartRadio or whatever, you can't find it and you don't want to download another one just to catch a show, remember, you can always go to our iTunes, or our fucking YouTube channel. You go to our YouTube channel, the show gets put up there the day it gets published. So there is that. And don't forget about our Vessel of the Art giveaway. Right now, all you have to do is like our Facebook page, the Abracast Facebook page, and sign into the newsletter, and you're registered to win the sweet-ass mason jar and some other swag. And the mason jar has the Abracast logo on it. Again, it's called the Vessel of the Art giveaway. We're going to be doing... announcing the winner on March 20th and another one on April 17th on a go live on the Abracast Facebook page. So check us out there. We're rolling out these go lives and we're doing it often. We're doing them often. So you're missing stuff out if you're not following the Facebook page. Don't forget to check out the website. There's social media links at the bottom, abracast.com. Sign into the mailing list. You get access to some bonus. Usually it's it's visual components or additional notes to the episodes. And, the Abracast Facebook page, the Abracast YouTube page. You could join us all there. Social media site, website, mailing list. That's it. All right. Out.